Chris Oatley's ArtCast, episode 96. Interview with creature designer and fantasy illustrator Brynn Metheney, part 1. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the ArtCast by the Oatley Academy of Visual Storytelling. I'm Chris Oatley, director of the Oatley Academy and your host. I was a character designer and visual development artist at Disney, and now I teach full-time and produce this show where I help you make a living from your own imagination. Find more art and story podcasts from some of the most inspiring voices in animation, games, kids' books, VFX, and comics at oatleyacademy.com/shows. Brynn Metheney puts the dragons in Dungeons & Dragons. While many of her animals come from imaginary worlds, they look like they could exist in this one. In part 1 of our interview, we talk about Brynn's childhood in the desert, how her father's job as an engineer helped her to understand creature design, and how she makes her animals feel so real. Spoiler alert, it does not involve sitting still. Ejiwa Ebenebe, aka Edge, now a producer on the ArtCast, joins me as co-host. Her raw honesty and humility inspired a conversation unlike any we've had on the ArtCast before. We'll start Brynn's inspiring interview in just a second, but first I'd like to invite you to join my brush club at the Oatley Academy. With your free membership to the Oatley Academy Brush Club, you'll get a new set of custom Photoshop brushes every month for a year, plus a how-to video for each new brush set. Here's a sneak peek at the brushes you'll receive. Stylized scatter brushes for cartoony worlds, tree brushes for naturalistic foliage, perspective brushes for environment design, bug brushes for designing creepy creatures, heavy metal brushes for industrial textures, and lots more. Go to oatleyacademy.com/go/Oatley brushes and sign up today. That's oatleyacademy.com/go/Oatley, OATLEY brushes. It's a whole year of new inspiration, and it's 100% free. Again, go to oatleyacademy.com/go/Oatley brushes and get your first brush set today. So Brynn, take us all the way back.
Let's see. So I was born in the desert of New Mexico, and then I moved to another desert in Southern California, like high desert Mojave area. So I grew up sort of where there wasn't a lot to do, and I was kind of exposed to a pretty steady diet of Disney movies, action movies. I guess what a lot of American children kind of consume when they're little. My dad would always show me like Star Wars and Terminator and Total Recall.
Nice.
I was like 8. 8 or 9. And looking at Disney and Looney Tunes and stuff like that, I really wanted to be an animator when I was a kid, because I found out that you could get money for like drawing cartoons. That was like the coolest idea in the world. I was like, what? This is an awesome planet that we live on. Sweet. So I decided that I would start drawing. And I also was super big into animals. The first thing I ever drew, I remember, were like cats and dogs. And so it kind of all sort of collided into one sort of interest, where I was drawing like Disney cartoons, which were always super focused on animals at some point, and then also just my own fascination with them kind of grew into this lifelong obsession of drawing animals and creatures as best I could. So,
was your family artistic, or did you have teachers that influenced you?
My dad is an aerospace engineer, and he grew up drawing a lot of like robots and tanks and planes and stuff. He actually like when he saw Star Wars, like when it actually came out in theaters for the first time, that kind of really inspired him. And he wanted to get into film, but it ended up that he just designed the real thing. So now he designs scary planes.
So cool.
It's very cool. It's really, really awesome. So he would always kind of draw along with me. We never really like had a common subject because I was like, I remember really distinctly actually this memory of like him drawing me a gorilla and just suffering through it the whole time. Like, what is this thing? Like, why am I drawing this for you? And then, but I remember it being like a really big lesson. He would always draw with me. I remember drawing him a tank later, and he was kind of like, "You should just stick to the animals, kid." I don't know what this is. No, he was excited, but it was kind of like, and you know, my mom's always been creative too, like in other ways. We always have been like DIY crafts people kind of in my family too. So we were always doing something.
You were constantly exposed to image making and like a visual craft of some sort.
Yeah, definitely. And they were very like supportive in that, which I'm very fortunate to have had that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it's cool.
Oh, it's great. And so how about the analysis? Like your work is beautiful and yet so accurate. You know what I mean? There's a real science to it in the precision and the, you know, even in your creatures, obviously and we'll get into, you know, creature stuff later, but yeah, you said you were drawing dogs and cats. How much of the accuracy, even at a young age, was important to you?
It was a pretty big deal. I remember a lot of how I learned how to draw was through tracing, actually. I remember like my dad handing me a pad of tracing paper because that's what engineers used a lot back when they were still doing stuff by hand.
Right.
And he was like, look, you can lay this over, you know, the tigers you're drawing out of this book, and you can get like a really good look at how they're put together that way. And I was like, oh, I feel like that engineering side of kind of analyzing things and asking those questions definitely played into like, okay, this thing is a machine almost. It's put together in a certain way, and it's held together by, you know, muscles and tendons and all these amazing things. And so it's just about building that up. And I'd say that in combination with studying Disney cartoons, I was so into those cartoons, but they have such a beautiful design quality to them. And I think 7-year-old me or 9-year-old me was kind of maybe sort of subliminally helped by this. Like going forward, I was kind of like, okay, well, this is what a real tiger looks like, and this is what Shere Khan looks like. And so I can kind of see how to simplify those forms and then bring it back to a more realistic space. It kind of helps sometimes to break things into like simplistic shapes or maybe a more exaggerated feel to kind of capture that energy, and then bring it back a bit to more of a realistic sort of technical point of view. And
now this is difficult no matter which way you slice it. You know, it's like this is a real challenge. Were you inspired by the challenge? Were you discouraged by the challenge? I mean, I'm trying to understand, you know, how you thought. I mean, clearly you're thinking about the process in a very analytical way, even at a young age. Right. But that's hard. So what was your attitude about that?
It was tough. I remember distinctly being pretty discouraged sometimes if I couldn't get it right. I kind of learned quickly that, like, it's okay if you don't get it, but maybe take a break and then come back to it and see it with new eyes. A lot of times my dad would be like, sleep on it. And when you wake up in the morning, you'll see it differently. And like 99% of the time he was completely right, because I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh, of course, duh, like I need to change this. You know, and I still use that. You know, I'll look away or I'll, you know, take a walk or get on my phone for a minute or whatever. I mean, you know, we all check our stupid social networks every 15 minutes. But sometimes, like, you need that break to kind of, like, decompress for a minute when you're frustrated with a piece. And when you come back to it, it can look, like, new, you know, and you see it clearly. So what I did a lot of times when I was young was, like, especially when I got into, like, junior high, I started keeping a lot more of my work. And then I'd go back, like, a year prior and look at, like, all the horrible mistakes and all the bad work I was doing. And it was like, God, what was I thinking? Jeez, really? Like, ugh. And it was kind of this ritual I would do. Like, I don't know. I was like, I don't know, 14. And I was like on my floor, you know, looking at all these weird drawings. And I was like, you know, I've really improved. So as long as I keep going, then each year I'll get better and better. And I still do it. I still have a day where I sit down and I kind of look through old stuff and I'm like, all right, I'm totally still getting it.
At what age did that begin, Brynn? Did you start doing that?
Around like junior high, I think. So about 13. Like I noticed it one day where I was like drawing a Disney cartoon and I looked back at the same, drawing I had done like 2 years prior and I was like, hey, I've improved here.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I kind of kept always doing that and having these like, ritual visits with myself at least once or twice a year where I'd sit down and be like, let me look at my old work and see where I've come from. And I don't know that I necessarily knew that that's what I was doing. I just thought it was fun. So it's like, I'm going to go be alone in my room for a little bit and like kind of laugh at what I did a year ago. If you guys need me,
I'll be in there.
My goals, like.
You were such a thoughtful kid.
I think it's because I was like so alone.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm just so alone.
Oh my God. Was that more just because of the way you were wired, or was it geography? I mean,
no, because I had plenty of kids on my street. Like we grew up in a desert town, but it was the neighborhood we grew up in was pretty developed. It wasn't later on when I got into like 5th grade and junior high, I kind of moved out to a more rural place, but I still had access to friends. I think I was just wired that way. My mom has this story of me when I was like, it was my 5th birthday. I remember this. There's video of it, and it's really bad. And she got me like this huge plastic dinosaur set. It was awesome. And I had all these like friends there that I just didn't care about. I was like, oh. And so I grabbed all my dinosaurs and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, can I go have alone time?
Oh my God.
And so alone time was this thing that I did when I was like 5. Like I could only be with people for like 6 to 8 hours. And like when I go to conventions and stuff, like I really want to be that person that's like on all the time. And like, but I just can't do it. Like as hard as I try, I'm like, I'm done. I have so much fun with them. But there comes a point when it's like, okay, I need to go recharge and I'll see you guys like, 6 hours. So bye.
Yeah. Yeah. So you moved out into a more rural area. Where was that?
Well, it's Quartz Hill. It's not necessarily like its own town, but it thinks it is. It's part of Palmdale. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, Palmdale. Oh, I know exactly where you're talking about.
That high desert. Oh, my. Yeah. At the time, it didn't have a lot to it. Like Quartz Hill was still pretty much like horse ranches and stuff. Now it's much more developed. Kind of sadly, we've lost a lot of really great trails and stuff to tracking homes, But yeah, there was, rattlesnakes and all kinds of stuff in my backyard. So
wow.
It was a serious place.
Obstacle course.
Yeah.
To get to school.
Basically, yeah. But I was always in charge of like rounding up all the animals. Like,
oh my God.
It's really bad.
The snake whisperer.
I caught quite a few snakes. My dad would be like, Brynn, what kind of snake is this? And I'm like, 14, and I'm like, Dad, it's a king snake. It's fine. Let me grab it. And like, it's a gopher snake. I got this.
Oh my God. You're like the Steve Irwin of Palmdale.
He was a big inspiration to my childhood.
So you're fairly fearless, despite the fact that you are an introvert.
Yeah. So socially, I'm terrified most of the time. Like, anytime I have to interact with a human, I get really freaked out and really scared. I reread emails like 47,000 times. I like kind of think about things, overthink things way too much. I sort of like plan out what I'm going to say. Like leading up to this today, I was kind of like, I need to do some stretches, like make sure that like I'm hydrated and
that's
all this
great.
Weird stuff. So, yeah, socially I get a little nervous, but when it comes to like animals and talking about them and creatures, I tend to kind of forget about all of that, and I sort of will explode. Like Mike will come in the mornings, and he calls it the warm-up period, where I'm kind of quiet, and he has to sort of like talk to me for a bit. And so he always tries to bring up like an animal thing, and then I'm like on, and I just like I'm like blah 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 blah.
Man, that is amazing.
Shut up, so. Yeah.
Now, how about that? I mean, obviously, you have always been obsessed with animals. That's clear. But something that I try and encourage my students and subscribers who write me, something I try and encourage them in is, well, Laura Ennis said it best, actually. She said, your doodles are the clue to your calling. Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. And sometimes it's not literally the things that you doodle mindlessly, or I don't doodle mindlessly when I'm on the phone or whatever. I can't do anything at the same time as something else. I can only, I can do one thing. My point being that there is evidence in the things that you can lose track of time doing, or the things that you have obsessions with. There are clues in that. Right. And, when you're looking for your own visual voice, when you're looking for your creative calling and so forth, look at your doodles or the things that are similar to that. When your desk gets cluttered, what's on it? When your room is a wreck, what's in it? And right. When you flip back through your old calendar pages, where have you been spending time? Whatever that is. Anyway, so I'm interested in, because it's so much of your career is related to real animals, and you draw so many fictional ones. Mm-hmm. At what point did this start to become evident that specialization was a worthy pursuit? How did you figure that out?
I think it happened in college. Okay. I remember very distinctly. So we had this thing called Junior Review. Okay. And it was where we sort of put up assignments that we were proud of and were reviewed by usually 2 instructors from the department to kind of see where we were in the program and how we should advance and, if we should advance at all or whatever. And so I remember having 2 rows on the wall, and one was sort of this editorial row where it was a lot of figure-based stuff and more conceptual illustration for magazines. And then I had a row on the bottom, which was all these weird creatures. It was essentially the beginning of the Moray River Project before I knew what that was. And I remember it was Robert Hunt and Dougal Sturmer that gave me my review. So Robert was kind of looked over at Dougal and he was like, "What do you think?" And Dougal was like, "You need to stop doing the stuff on top. Just stick to the stuff on the bottom, kid." And it was just okay, wow. Cool, because that's really, I had always wanted to be a creature designer. I go back to, I talked about my childhood and growing up on these movies and cartoons and stuff, and I do remember distinctly, watching Star Wars and seeing the Rancor for the first time and thinking holy crap, I want to do that. I want to be a part of that project somehow. And so ever since I was a little girl, I've been wanting to draw monsters for a living, in the back of my head. And, other things kind of happened too. I would draw anime or figure drawings or whatever else, and when I went to illustration school, my sketchbooks always were full of critters and aliens and animals and all kinds of stuff. I was very keen on maybe, learning other things, just because I knew that being a concept artist in particular was so difficult to find that kind of work. And the more, varied you are, the more chance you have getting hired by a studio for sure. But something in me that day, I remember walking home from that review and just feeling like I was on top of the world. I was like, man, someone told me that this is what I should be doing. I should be doing this. So I just went home and I came up with the Moray River. And I was like, I'm going to do this for my thesis. And this is going to be great. And Dougal took me a semester early so I could have his last thesis project with him. And so it was just kind of this amazing moment. And I remember also Robert was he was very you should totally be doing this creature stuff, but you got to push it. You got to make sure that you're approaching this from a different way than every other artist out there, because there are plenty of other artists who can draw a cool dragon or whatever you want to draw. You have to make it special. It was a really intense day. Wow. But I remember that being one of those moments where I was like, yeah, this is totally what I should be doing. And I never looked back after that. I was like, I'll draw other things, sure, but I don't really want to. And I, if I'm going to do what I love and lead for this and work hard at it, I want to be drawing something that I want to draw. So from then on, I was just like, it's creatures. That's it.
You mentioned earlier that you always had an affinity for mimicking reality and knowing what it looked like when it was accurate and when it wasn't. But you also learned how to distill that down. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, how do you decide what you leave out and what you leave in?
That's a good question. And I think a lot of that comes with drawing an animal over and over and over. And I think it's a lot about silhouette too. When you think of like a lion, you know, what do you think of immediately is the mane and like big paws and a long tail. And so if you can get those 3 elements in, you've got yourself a good lion, you know? And I think just kind of adding a bit of a personal flair to it in whichever sort of way you can helps, you know, by maybe pushing proportion or shape and that sort of thing can definitely help. I think a lot of it just comes with experimenting, you know, sort of breaking down what you see into shapes and really looking at animals. Like, I am constantly surprised by them. There's never a day where I think, man, drawing animals is boring. It's like, I mean, you think you know what an animal looks like. Yeah. Really look at it and you're like, wait, no, I have no idea what this animal looks like, really. Like, I've been drawing the wrong thing this whole time. Wow. And so, you know, those moments are the best moments. But it really helps inform, like, that simple design. Because the more you can get at the real essence of that shape, the more elegant that design's going to be. And I use the 101 Dalmatians as an example constantly because the dogs in that film are so true to their breeds, and they're just like 20 lines, you know, really. And it's so like elegant and just gorgeous. And they, you know, they even captured the animal's gait. Like, they really think about like how that animal is moving and walking through a scene. It's all about observation is really what I'm trying to say, I guess. That's fantastic. Like, what you said about silhouettes actually really resonated with me. I'm not sure why, but I mean, people say it all the time, right? Like, silhouette is most important. But it's not until you just said it with regards to the lion, it sunk in that that's how you identify the form, you know? It's crazy how much that helps. But I mean, if you ask a kid like how to draw a giraffe, he'll draw a long neck and like, you know, spindly legs, and that's the essence. That's the animal. It's a long neck and big legs. And so it's like, okay, that's what I need to draw. And so then you can find those small details and stuff, but it's all about working general to specific. And that has stuck with me to this day. Like, that is one of my mantras that I'm constantly telling myself, like, start big with shapes and then get into your details, you know? So. That's so fantastic.
So now, how about dimensionality? I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, even just feel my heart just race just a little bit, like thinking about it. The structure, Brynn, good God, the structure in your drawings makes me crazy.
That's fantastic.
Oh man, yeah, I just feel, oh God, it's visceral. There's 2 things that I respond to when I see your art in terms of volume. So one is what's underneath, you know, that 3D sense, almost like the part of the sketch, the lighter lines, the sketchier part that we can often see through the color or the tone or whatever. So that's one thing. I'm talking about kind of as you build up the drawing. The other thing that I'm talking about, though, is the mechanics of the animal. And I know, yes, a lot of that is observation and everything, but and I know you already kind of talked about this silhouette and simplification, but I'm also interested in, okay, great, but silhouette, and I feel like I struggle with this often. The longer I do this, the more important silhouette has become to me, and that's also goes for teaching as well. But it's very difficult to pull something from a 2-dimensional sensibility into a 3-dimensional sensibility. That's really hard. So I guess the question I'm asking is, are those things connected for you? And if so, how? And if not, tell me.
I think they're totally connected. Something that I'm constantly thinking about in, you know, my work is, how does this creature move? I never think about it standing still, because nothing alive stands still. Any little doodle I'm drawing, I'm kind of always thinking about, like, okay, what does that feel like to like land on like a hard surface? Or what does it feel like to maybe walk up a hill or sit in a tree? Like, what would that feel like in my own body? And so I think that kind of comes from being really interested in animation and sort of studying that in college. I didn't study it much, but I was such a geek about animation. And I knew that animators were known to sort of act out and like sort of feel their body as their subject, you know, back and forth, and kind of have that conversation with their own physiology. And I firmly believe in that. Anytime I draw like an open mouth, and I draw so many open mouths because every monster is always roaring. For every Dungeons and Dragons campaign ever, and Pathfinder, everything's roaring and mad. So, but I never fail to not make that expression. I'm always like kind of having that moment where I'm like acting it out a bit and sort of feeling that weight. And so part of it comes from that. I think another part of it is, having an engineer for a father, he was always kind of approaching my work from an engineering point of view, and engineers work in 3D space in their minds. And so he was kind of always saying like, okay, this looks really good. What would it look like from behind? And I think that's something that, I've begun teaching this year at Laguna College of Art and Design. I'm their creature teacher. And
awesome.
Yeah, it's a rhyme. Creature teacher. So I teach animal and creature drawing for games, and constantly telling students to draw through forms. Like, really imagine that rib cage sitting in there, and what angle is it sitting at? We know what a rib cage looks like, and we know that we can draw like a shorthand sort of representation of it. If you can draw it inside that bear, you'll know where everything else kind of lies. And if you start to build it up from the inside out by drawing through those forms and really sort of drawing around them, then you'll really begin to get that sense of volume into your drawings that you really want.
Goodness gracious.
Does that answer that question?
Yep, sure does.
Okay, cool.
How much do you think about the actual shape of the skeleton?
At least in creature drawing and animal drawing, I'm always looking for, the skull. I'll sort of kind of draw down the neck. I'll sort of find that rib cage, and then I'll sort of draw in the scapula, the elbow, and the wrists, and go from there. Then I'll kind of work towards the back, draw in the pelvis, work down the leg to the knee to the foot, and down into the toes. Uh-huh. So as far as the actual shape of a skeleton, the only time I really tackle that in detail is if I'm working for a rig. So if I have concepts that I need to be modeled, sometimes I'll provide a skeleton and a muscle overlay of the creature or animal that they need to rig up for animation, because it's so helpful for animators to have, and for riggers and modelers, to have that kind of explained for them in that way. But in my own personal work, depending on what it is, it kind of varies. So I look at the skeleton quite a bit in terms of finding out where landmarks are, but I don't necessarily dive into it full force unless I'm working for something that needs to be animated later.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
And that's really a production, like a functional thing, really. I mean, in terms of the production.
It really is, yeah. It helps so much. That skeleton is so important because especially on, quadrupedal animals, where that knee bends is not where that knee cap is. The patella is a lot higher than you'd think it would be, like on the skeleton of a dog. And so you need to know where the leg actually bends as opposed to where the knee joint, actually is. If you can relate your creature or your animal's anatomy back to yourself, it's eye-opening because there's so much. We're all the same, really. And I think in comparative anatomy, it's so apparent. You really understand, this is a horse is literally just a giant animal on enlarged toenail feet. They're not they're running on toes, just giant toes. It's so weird.
Giant
and so if you look at a horse, their front knee is what they're kind of referred to in anatomy is actually their wrist. It's their front wrist. So it's, that place where a horse's front leg bends so elegantly is just a really elongated wrist. And then the little hock at the end there is sort of the beginning of their, one of their finger bones, the ends of their finger bones. When you start to sort of compare it back to human anatomy, you really realize that it's just exaggerated proportions and that we're all the same thing when it comes to vertebrate anatomy anyway.
Wow, it's incredible. And so the connection, though, there's this subconscious connection that's in the cartoonish, the people that we see inside of animals, but there's also this other layer that is much deeper and even more complex in this kind of scientific sense.
Yeah, it's definitely there. So I think it's important for artists that, as they draw horses, and I tell my students that if there's one animal you should learn to draw well, it is the horse, because working as a fantasy illustrator, there's probably not another animal I've drawn so much. And I think any illustrator or artist or animator or whoever, you probably end up drawing a horse at some point in your life because they're such a big part of our civilization. They kind of helped build humanity, so of course they're going to be included in everything. Them and dogs, they're kind of the two quintessential animals, I think. But really break down that animal in like a more comparative way. Like find out where those bones are, what they're called, where that scapula is on a horse, and figure out where it is on a human, and begin to realize why are they shaped the way they are, and why are they placed in the places they are, and you'll start to kind of have an understanding of how that animal moves around and acts and has evolved. So
this is good news. That's good news for draftsmen, right? I mean, that's great.
For sure. It's big. You mean like pencil draftsmen?
Well, or painters. I mean, any illustrators. I mean, it's really animators. It's really good news because it helps to build a bridge. Because I know, I mean, I've been drawing animals for a long time. I drew animals in high school a bit, and then around the Lion King time, there was that was one of the big media angles on the release of that movie was, they brought real lions into the studio, and that kind of thing, and so that was cool. Kind of out there in the mainstream. And so I remember thinking, I got to double down on animals. Of course, I'm leaving out the part that I was for the longest time an aspiring animator, 2D pencil animator, and it's a long story, but the point is that I was paying attention. Well, I still do, but for different reasons. But I was paying attention to that. It was important. But I remember almost the fragmentation of animal anatomy. It was hard for me to draw those conclusions mentally. It was, or maybe I don't know how hard it was or not. I didn't. I just didn't draw those conclusions. I don't think anybody explained that to me and or made that connection for me. And anyway, I guess the point is that is, I mean, as far as the advice that I've heard on both creature design and real animal anatomy, drawing, that's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard is to find the relationships, because it helps to contain what can otherwise seem like chaos.
Yeah, it can be very overwhelming, I think, especially when you start to get into, something like a horse. It's so exaggerated, and the shoulders are like in the body, and the elbows, like where are they even? And are those knees or wrists? I don't know. And so you're just kind of like completely lost. And it can be hard. And I think, but again, if you break it down into those shapes, something that I tell my students a lot is, look for the head, look for the neck, look for the body, the scapula, the tibula, fibula, the femur, that sort of thing. Look for those big shapes that kind of surround those bones, and you can draw any vertebrate animal you want, because it's exactly the same shapes. They're just in different places, they're just exaggerated in different areas. And so I don't remember when I realized that. It might have just kind of always been there because I was such a wild animal girl when I was a kid that I was like moving around like them anyway and kind of running around. And so I think I kind of got this like, okay, so I totally wanted to be Andy Serkis when I was a kid.
Wow.
That guy's weird job of like running around being a monster human. Yeah. I was like, so cool. Every 7-year-old, wants to do that. But having that like kind of like physical experience of feeling your own body like in that sort of position kind of gives you an appreciation of like, okay, I'm a human and I'm designed to walk around on 2 legs. If I stand on my, on 4 legs, it's really hard. And it's really hard because my scapula are not positioned in a way where it's efficient. And so you kind of start to think like an engineer in a way and really start to see like why things are the way they are, and how it makes sense with gravity. It's all about gravity, really, is the key.
Totally. And attitude is about gravity. This is something that I'm constantly trying to get my students to do, is get out of your seat and stand like the character. Lean like the character, lay like the character. You have, and the irony of this is that it requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability to do this, even though you're by yourself in your office. It's not like the folks at Pixar or whatever, it's like anyone could walk into their office at any time when they're doing something stupid on camera, and a lot of that is like on the DVDs now, it's like that should be more, I guess, perceived as being more embarrassing. It's like you have control over your environment. You're not going to get discovered. And yet You know, I feel like a lot of artists will often get caught into sort of the vortex of struggling with the screen, with the Cintiq or with the sketch pad, instead of like, wait, just stop drawing, put the drawing utensil down and walk around and feel it, because you'll come up with at least probably a more interesting drawing, if not more accurate.
Well, I mean, and I think we forget that drawing is a very physical thing. It has little to do with your brain. I mean, it has a lot to do with your brain. You're always thinking, but you are controlling your hand in a very physical way. You're using your body to make something. And so I think when you use your body to sort of act something out, that energy and that memory gets transferred into that drawing, you know, because it's inevitable. You know, if you can feel it, then you can draw it, I think. You know, it's helped me anyway. So
I love that.
Yeah, act like your creatures. I want to see like every artist out there roaring.
Yeah, it's as if a lot of artists, especially young artists that I meet, need permission to be passionate about the actual process.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, no, you're allowed. Like, you can take the dream part of the passion and use that in the actual physical making of the drawing. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. You know, I mean, especially as like a monster designer, illustrator person, what I do is pretty silly. It's, you know, I draw like random, like I draw dragons and I get really serious about it. And I have like email discussions with an art director about like why the wings are the way they are and all this stuff. And it's an imaginary creature that, you know, just doesn't exist. But so if you break it down to like, okay, you know, what I do, you know, at least as animators and illustrators and designers is, you know, I make the impossible possible. So why hold back when you want to like act it out for a minute or stand up? People tend to look down on folks who have a lot of fun making art. I think, you know, cartoons and comics have always kind of suffered from this. They're for kids. They're just fun. They're not serious. When in fact, like, they're probably some of the best mediums to explain, you know, our world and stories and connect with us on a really intimate level. And I think you see that joy or that fear or that pain that the artist went through to make that. And I think it's the same whether it was pain or joy. Yeah. You know, I mean, you can't watch a Disney movie and not smile when you see like Pongo trotting through the park. You know, to get.
It's seriously one of my favorite moments in that. It's so beautiful.
Oh, I know. It's gorgeous. And he's just, you know, just the life and the joy. Like, how could a like dude who's super bummed out or a lady who's super bummed out like draw something like that? Like,
exactly.
You have to act that out. And I think it's okay to be happy when you draw. You should be, because there's out there that's really sad.
It's amazing.
It's kind of crazy. So it's. I think this is really good. I'm glad that this came up because I think a lot of students do get hesitant to give into that joy. And I say, go for it. Have fun. Because, you know, everything else in life is so stressful all the time. Right. And, you know, you got all these bills and all these things happening. And it's like, you know, when you sit down to draw, that's your time. And you might as well have a blast doing it because, like, you get to do what you love for money. And you get to do what you love, like, as just what you love. Like, you can do that. It's a privilege, you know. Have fun with it. Go, you know. Yeah,
right. I think that there's a power. Well, as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, and everybody acknowledges the power of art. Yeah. Like, you meet almost no one who doesn't acknowledge that art has a tremendous mystical power. And I think that we get so obsessed with vocation at such an early age now, with especially with the internet, that's part of where this gets lost, this sense of playfulness and whimsy and generosity, you know. And I was in a conversation with one of my students. He was in Films on Paper with Justin Copeland, and then he's been we've been doing some digital painting stuff together recently. And we were in a conversation at CTNX last year about confidence and how he was like struggling not with his confidence in drawing. You know, I think he was aware of his own growth and kind of his journey, and he was in touch with that. Yeah, he had been struggling with this idea of the "hey, look at me" aspect of art. And, you know, I said, it's not arrogance, and it certainly isn't for you. He is such a humble guy. I said, art is generosity, or at least it can be. I go, you have the ability to make people happy and to move them, you know, in an emotional way. You have your drawings, and his drawings in particular, have this sketchy, visceral, like really intense quality to them. And I've described this on the show before. I just love the way he makes lines. He doesn't even, I don't even have to recognize the drawing yet. You know, it doesn't even have to be done. Just to see him making lines, it's appealing. And I was like, just that alone can remind people of their own humanity. You know, and we can, like, we need that now, right now. You know, it's like we need to be awakened and reminded of our humanity and our connection. And in your case, you know, our connection to animals is like, that's so important. We need to be, if even subconsciously through your visual art and through your creature design, reminding the world that they're connected to the environment and animals. And, you know, anyway, I don't want to get all political, but, you know, I mean, this is important. It's valuable no matter kind of where you fall on this, you know, political spectrum. Yeah,
it really is. I mean, you know, art has always served as a way to sort of communicate with society. And whether you're making comics or cartoons or gallery paintings or whatever you make, like, you're communicating an idea and something to people. And I think, like, getting that out there is really important. And remembering that, like, we're all struggling. There's never like a day where I wake up and I'm like, I know exactly my purpose and like what I'm doing. You know, like I barely, like, I don't know, I wake up and I'm like, oh, I just did this yesterday. Like, what are we doing? And, you know, everyone has their thing that they struggle with. And I think, like, in the age of like social media, we're sort of given highlight reels constantly. You know, everyone's got it figured out. You put your best face forward. And I mean, I know I do. I only show the good stuff on social media. Nobody sees the bad stuff. But, you know, so everything's edited, you know, so everyone is kind of like, you know, especially students now, I think, you know, they're kind of like, well, everyone else gets it. Why don't I? And it's like, no, nobody else gets it. Nobody really knows what they're doing. We're all just kind of flinging ourselves at this, trying to figure it out just like you. We just know how to smile when the cameras are on. You know, that's like, but then, you know, you go in your studio and you're like, what am I going to do?
And then you cry and cry.
Sobbing, like,
in the corner alone.
Tears in my dinosaur drawing.
Oh.
You know, and it's something that I think a lot of us tend to forget. I mean, I forget that. I'm always, you know, talking to my husband like, I don't know, this artist hasn't figured out, I don't know what I'm doing. And he has to constantly remind me, he's like, Brynn, nobody knows like what they're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Like, you're doing fine. Just keep making work, you know? And that's probably the best advice is like, even when you feel like you have no idea what you're doing, just make some work, because at least you're making work.
Yeah, exactly.
In part 2, Brynn shares some nitty-gritty drawing tips and practical ways to improve when your artistic growth seems slow. She traces her path from obsessive animal doodler to official creature teacher and talks about the benefits of specialization. Today, in part 1, Brynn talked about finding the similarities in animals and using those blueprints to engineer imaginary creatures. Have you ever found a new idea by closely observing reality? Tell us about it. Join the conversation in the comments at oatleyacademy.com/go/Brynn96. That's BRYNN 96. As an Oatley Academy student, you get access to extended producer's cut versions of most of our podcast interviews. You can hear the entire 2-hour interview with Brynn Metheney, plus extended interviews with ArtCast favorites like Armand Serrano and Claire Keane when you enroll in any of our self-guided courses. At the time of this recording, we have 2 self-guided courses available. The Magic Box, where you'll learn to become a digital painting wizard with hundreds of pro workflows, techniques, and time savers demonstrated step by step. And we also have the Storytellers Summit, where you'll learn to craft transcendent stories from some of the entertainment industry's best teachers. Learn more at oatleyacademy.com/courses. That's oatleyacademy.com/courses. And don't forget to join the Brush Club. You'll get free Photoshop brushes that I made, every single month for a year, and a how-to video to go with each new brush set. Join the Brush Club today at oatleyacademy.com/go/Oatley brushes. Until next time, my friends, stay strong and stay close. The ArtCast is a production of the Oatley Academy of Visual Storytelling. I'm Chris Oatley, your host and producer. My assistant producers are Anya Marcos and Ejiwa Ebenebe. Kevin Chandler edited this episode. Austin Light wrote the copy. Zijan Yan and I did the mix. The music is by Storybook Steve and Kangaralian. Find more art and story podcasts designed to help you make a living from your own imagination at oatleyacademy.com/shows. Brynn Metheney puts Brynn Metheney puts the dragons in Dungeons and Dragons. Brynn Metheney puts the She traces her path from obsessive animal doodler to creature. She traces her path from obsessive animal doodler to official creature it's hard to say. To official creature teacher, and talks about the benefits of specialization. Whew, let's do one more.
Official creature teacher. Good luck.
Yeah.
Who wrote that line?
Austin.
Of course.
It's great, though, if I can pull it off.